Okay, good. So let's make a start. So today we're going to talk about delegation. We're going to talk about how delegation really is, from a leadership perspective, a multiplier and an accelerator of effectiveness and efficiency. And today's session is really an opportunity to create some thinking space. I often say this in sessions that I run with clients and with people that come on these calls, is that we get very sparse amounts of time now to get clear thinking space, and that can cause us challenges, because if you continue to just kind of work through what you're doing the way that you've always done it, then that can create issues within a business, because you're not actually progressing or making any advancements. We really want to help people to get those advancements and those opportunities to progress and improve. And in particular, if we're in leadership positions, we want that for our teams. And delegation is one of the ways in which we can do that. So we'll look at why people don't delegate today. We'll kind of look at some of the resistance and the barriers, and some of it's evidential, some of it is anecdotal. We'll also then say, okay, how do we start delegating? And think about a process. I want to share a process with you for delegating and some principles for successful delegating within your business and your roles. And I'll probably ask you to just jump into the chat and share some ideas or thoughts as we go through today's session as well. If you want to come off mute at any point and contribute, then feel free to do that, or ask any questions. You've got a chance to do that as well. I really love this quote from this guy, Dave Ramsey. It kind of sums it up, really, what delegation is and why sometimes people don't delegate. But delegation, as he says, requires the willingness to pay for short-term failures, and I would say failures and investment of time, in order to gain long-term competency, and I would add to that efficiency. And I think this is why delegation is such a difficult thing for leaders to get their minds around. It's because it requires some upfront investment that pays you off in the long term. And if you don't make that investment upfront, then you never get that long-term payoff. And it really is, you've heard the term delayed gratification. It really is a delayed gratification strategy to be delegating within your business. And I put a poll out on LinkedIn about delegation and asked, how important is it for your sanity and success as a leader? And we had lots of different kind of perspectives shared through that post and that poll, but a few I'll call out. So one person saying, not enough people delegate, but ask yourself, how much extra value could you bring to the company or the team that you work in, or the individuals that you're working with, if you had an extra half a day per week? And that's a really good sense check, actually. If someone could say to you, I can get you another half a day a week, what would you do with it? And then that is why you should delegate, because if you get this right, you will free up at least half a day a week, and possibly more, depending on what you delegate and how competent your team is around you as you build those delegation skills. Another comment here, not only does delegating free up time and mental energy, absolutely right, but it also empowers team members to grow and develop their skills. So it's not just about our role as a leader and how it frees you up to be more efficient and do more. It's also how it helps your teams to grow and develop through the process of delegation. And then final comment that I'll just flag on this post was a great question about delegation. Trust is needed, though, and that comes at a price these days. So it's interesting. We've got a couple of comments here where they're saying, yeah, absolutely, we should do it. And then the classic kind of almost skeptical positioning on this, right? Trust is needed in order for us to delegate, and that comes at a price these days. And so really interesting that that's the opinion. And I think that probably really does sum up one of the key barriers to delegation, as well as the time, which is one of the barriers, that investment up front to release time later, especially when you're busy and there's a lot going on. Second is, do you trust someone enough to be able to delegate to them, especially if from the outset you're thinking, well, there's a price to pay for trusting someone to do something. So that skeptical attitude sometimes is the thing that can get in the way. So we have to try and really overcome those barriers as leaders ourselves, and start to change our perspective on delegating. And I think one of the big things is understanding what's the payoff if you can get this right, because that should be really the incentive as a leader to be able to lean into delegation and get better, because delegation is like any other skill we develop in management and leadership. It takes practice. It's something that builds and develops in terms of skill and competency the more we do it. But it takes that mental energy, that focus, and that intention to do it in the first place. And we have to get ourselves to a position where we see that as an opportunity, not as just something that is a nice to have or something that is an additional thing that we're doing. It should be integrated into our approach as leaders. And you're here on the call today to talk about delegation, and we're kind of saying, why don't people delegate? I'd love to hear, perhaps in the chat, what are some of the challenges that you personally are facing in your business with either with delegating or perhaps with not delegating? What are some of the things that you've experienced? And I'll just Enos has already put in the chat, started the chat off so you can see the chat box. So just drop something in there. For me personally, earlier in my career, I think one of the challenges with delegating was actually there were probably three things. The first was that I felt I had to have control of everything. And that was, I don't think that was conscious. It was just, I didn't know any better. So I felt I had to have a control and be all over everything. I think the second thing was I didn't know who I could trust with what to delegate. So because I hadn't had those conversations, it wasn't even in my thinking. I wasn't talking to people about what they could take on. And then thirdly, even if I did know who, I wasn't sure how to delegate effectively. So I had three things that were barriers to me doing it. It's a sense of control, not knowing who I could delegate to, and then not knowing how to do it if I was going to find the right person. So we're going to talk about all three of those things today to start to really get some perspective on how to be better at delegating. And hopefully you can relate to those challenges with delegating yourselves as well. So when I think about delegating, and then whenever I run these workshops, I always try and think more broadly. So delegating is one kind of slice of what we do as managers or leaders, and I like to think about leadership as a more holistic view on how we operate within our business. And I wrote this book called Coaching Leaders, which I'm sure you have heard of. If you haven't, and you're in a leadership position and you'd like to do more, you'd like to learn more about how to coach, not just individual coaching conversations, but strategically coach across your business and create a coaching culture, the book really helps you to explore how to do that very effectively. And it's the foundation of all the programs that I run related to leadership. And within the book, there's this model called the coach model. And before we just kind of dive straight to delegating, I think it's useful to look at this as context. So I think about this model as really becoming a framework that you can deploy within your business to be more effective as a leader right the way across all of your leadership teams. And it starts with a plan, right? So having a plan that you can articulate to your teams so that long-term and strategically, you know where you're going and your team can align their activities and all of the responsibilities and expectations with that long-term plan for the business. And that strategic alignment is really important because people want to feel part of something bigger. So get the plan in place, know how to articulate the plan, enroll your team in it. Okay, that's step one. Then you'll see in the center here, there's this kind of trust and relationships. Before we start to really think about how we engage and lead teams, we have to have some form of trust in place. And we have to have positive relationships or constructive relationships where we feel like we can kind of manage people and they want to be managed by you or by your leadership team. And once that trust is established and continually established, you'll see it's at the heart of the model. So it's something that we revisit regularly. Then we start to think about the process. And the first step of the process is what we call contracting. So you see that this model is called coach, and each letter of the word coach is a stage in the process. First stage in the process is contracting. And contract is about a strategic agreement about how you'll work together, the standards you'll meet, the behaviors and attitudes that you want to adopt, and holding people accountable to that as you go forward. So contract first. Next then is about objectives and goals. So setting clear expectations, making sure that everyone knows what their role is, what's required within their role, what are the key performance indicators that mean that person can be clear on what it takes to deliver in their role. Once those objectives and goals are set, then it's about giving them the space to kind of act on their expectations and deliver, while you regularly check in and observe. Just observe how they're getting on, observe and give you and them this visibility of how they're performing. And the reason that's important is because as you start to observe people, you will notice things that may need to be refined, improved, or changed. And that's where coaching fits. That's where kind of coaching conversations to improve performance and develop people really play a strong part in leaders building capability within their teams. And then that's the kind of penultimate part of the model. Final piece really is then thinking longer term, thinking about the business, succession planning, how you help people to elevate their roles, deliver at a higher level within the business. And we do that through development conversations, and we call it in our model heroes in the making. And it kind of, the reason that's called the hero stage is because we want to start to give people a vision of themselves that is much bigger than where they are today, much higher levels of operating within the business and delivery within the business than is happening currently. And that shift in thinking can be really powerful for you as a leader and for your teams, because you end up inspiring them to think much bigger than they had done previously ahead of that conversation. And then it's a cycle. Then it replays and replays, and it becomes a coaching and a leadership cycle that you can just keep going back through, whether that be quarterly, 6 monthly, annually. It's a really nice process that you then follow. But where we're going to focus on today is, if we think about delegating and where it fits, it's probably somewhere between objectives and coach for change. So somewhere along this line here. But when we are delegating, we really want to think about how we coach people to be successful with the task or the projects that we might be delegating to them. So let's talk about two things. We'll talk about principles and we'll talk about process. So principles and process. Now, why do we delegate? Well, lots of evidence on this. One study I like is this Gallup study that was done. Gallup are a polling company. They are really prolific in business. They used to be, if you had a childhood like mine in the kind of 70s, 80s, you might remember the Gallup Top 40, which was the kind of chart show, used to be on a Sunday night on the radio. And Gallup were the company that used to create all the data and measure and monitor which artists were where in the charts. They've since moved on to business studies and really thinking about how they can take data within the business context and help share those insights. So a Gallup study says that CEOs who excel in delegating generate 33% higher revenue than in those companies where that's not as effective. And the reason for that is because in the process of delegating, CEOs free up their time. They focus on activities that yield the highest returns and growth initiatives for their companies. And really, there's this mantra that says to maximize productivity and effectiveness, we should be asking on a regular basis, who should do this, and not how should I do this? And that's particularly for people who have been high performers in businesses turned leaders. That is a real shift in thinking, because normally they like that span of control. And I'm talking from experience here, but also they like the satisfaction of completing tasks. So you end up with this trap that people don't realize that they're in, that prevents them from delegating. And there's a great book, if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth a read if delegating is something you want to focus on. And it's called, I've got this book, it's a great book by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy called Who, Not How. And it really does start to force a change in your thinking so that you default to, okay, who's the best person to do this, not how do I do this? And that's when leaders manage to kind of elevate performance, elevate themselves. And as well as thinking who, not how, you then got to think really clearly about, okay, if I am starting to delegate and I'm using, the relationships and the development opportunities within my team to do that, actually, what's the process that I should go through? So I have this delegation top 10 checklist that work with clients on it that really seems to make a difference. So first things first is don't see delegation as like short-term stuff. Think about long-term planning, and think within that long-term planning, not only who am I delegating to, but which and what tasks should I be delegating, and why am I delegating them? Understanding why you're delegating them, and actually, if they're tasks that are low value add for you, but could be development opportunities for your team, they are perfect tasks to start to delegate. And There's this principle that I learned many years ago, probably 15 years ago, which almost sounds counterintuitive until you break it down. And that is that we should be delegating to the very lowest level of competence. So delegating to the lowest level of competence within our organization. And the reason for that is because, one, it's the most effective and efficient way to run your organization. But two, is because then it helps to upskill people to their maximum level of capability. And when we think about maximum levels of capability within people's comfort zones, actually that's where the stretch takes place, and that's where people's capability and performance starts to get really challenged at the right level. So we get the right energy and the right momentum because people are being challenged at a level that is comfortable for them, but also stretches them, and that's what we should be thinking about. And then the third thing about this kind of checklist is, when you consider delegating, am I delegating and not abdicating? And I was guilty of this when I first started trying to delegate, and abdicating is basically giving someone a task and then letting them get on with it without checking up, without providing any coaching, without really providing the right level of support, and without telling them why they're doing it. So when you abdicate something, you kind of forget that you're still responsible for the output or outcome of that task. Whereas when we delegate, we recognize that we're still on the hook for it, but someone else is going to deliver it on our behalf. And that's the key difference for me. Fourth is we talked about development, playing to your employees' strengths and their goals, their career goals, their development goals, and maybe their goals within their role as well. So we're really thinking about, what are the right tasks to be delegated to the right people, depending on, one, their strengths, two, their development goals. And then 5 is thinking about, as you delegate something, don't think about the task you're delegating. Think about the outcome of the task and what it is that task contributes to the business or to your role, not how that task is done. And the reason that's important is because people are really ingenious, and they will find ways to make that task complete that might be different from how you do it. And actually, as long as you and they are focused on the right outcome, the way in which they do it is less important than the outcome or the result. And then, of course, 6 is about thinking, am I providing the right resources? And where a task or a project might require engagement with other people in the business, the right authority. Am I giving this person the right authority to be able to truly follow through on this task, so they have the credibility to be able to deliver multiple elements of it with other members of the team? Really important to get resources and authority right. And then, of course, from a management perspective, agreeing the right level of support, the right communication, and a process for review with your team, so that they don't just feel like something's been handed off to them, like a rogue pass. Actually, what they feel is if this has been done in a way that's supportive, that's been well communicated, and they recognize that there's going to be a process of review afterwards, so they don't feel as if they've kind of just been left stranded with a new task. Really important we get that bit right. And then, of course, there's the term I like to remind myself of multiple times is, no plan survives contact with the enemy. It's one of the old generals used to say that. And obviously, we're not saying our team are the enemy, but it's a good reminder to us to say that nothing goes exactly according to plan in our businesses. There's always curveballs, things that come left field. And if it's tasks you're doing and you've been doing for a long time and you start to delegate them, there'll be things you do and that you don't even realize you do, and And so actually, when that stuff comes up with your team, remembering to recognize if there's progress, even if it's stalled, recognize progress, and that includes failures and it includes successes. If someone's learned that something doesn't work, actually you can say, it's great that you now know that, you know how to avoid it in future. So you're recognizing the progress that they're making, not just the successful completion of the task. And then, of course, remembering that this is a process. Delegating is a process. For someone to start to pick up, especially if it's larger, complex projects of yours, for someone to be able to pick those up, it's a process they're going to have to go through. They have to learn what to do, what works, what doesn't, what are the barriers and challenges, and how do they overcome them. All of those things are steps in the process. Appreciate that someone's going through a process and they're improving. And that really helps you to kind of really give people the right feedback as they're adopting new tasks and as you delegate them, because what we want is to create positivity around the task we're delegating, not criticism. Because when people start to feel criticized, they won't want to continue having tasks delegated to them. So as leaders and managers, it's our responsibility to really reinforce that process and progress. And then finally, this, if you can get this right with key members of your team, using delegation to continually elevate expectations and responsibilities so that people start to see themselves really taking a greater role within the business, but also contributing more and more to the business. That's what really tunes people in to being effective and delivering at the next level of performance. And of course, this allows you to start to think about succession planning for the future, because those people that are able to elevate their expectations, take on more of those tasks that you're effectively delegating, they are potentially your future leaders within the business, and that helps strengthen the organization. And so they are the considerations or principles. Now I've got this tool that I developed that I use and use with clients. It's really useful. It's just if you want to strategically start to delegate greater tasks, bigger projects within a business. Actually, this is like a briefing document. We call it the delegation process steps, but it really is like a briefing document. And so this is in a tool that we use in our coaching leader program called the Coaching Leaders Toolkit. This is one of the different tools in that toolkit. And I'll just walk you through the steps. So it says, define the task, project, or series of activities you're planning to delegate. So what is it you're delegating? Talk about why is this important to you or your business. Then talk about what the successful outcome of this task, project, or series of activities looks like. I describe the finished result. Remember, we said the what you're trying to do, not the how. Then talk about what are the potential pitfalls to avoid in completing this task or project. What are the indicators that this task is on track, especially if you are reviewing it as the process of delegation and the task being complete by your team member is happening, because you perhaps want to look at some of those indicators rather than the successful completion at different stages in your conversation. What tools are needed to successfully complete this task? Is it access to different systems within your business, perhaps gathering data, perhaps engaging with different people, making sure that that's clear from the outset. What support will be given to ensure the success of this task or project? When will you review progress to stay on track? So thinking about, especially if it's longer term, what's that frequency of review, and how do you make sure that is in place so that you and they stay on track with the task? Final couple of questions. How will you know if this task has been successfully delegated? So it's a really good sense check for yourself. How will I know when this has actually been delegated as in flight? And then finally, what is the reward for successful completion? What's in it for your team member to pick this up? And it doesn't have to be a financial reward. It can be, something that you decide between you. It might be, some kind of recognition. It might be some kind of, it could be a voucher, or it could be something that's a token gesture that really helps them to think about that positive reinforcement of delegating and accepting the delegated task. And you'll see that then I've got an example. So you can see that this is an example of a potential process that we've delegated within our business. And it's quite nice that it gives you just something to review, so that you can say, okay, well, that's what it might look like in terms of a completed document that you would use then to have that delegation conversation and walk through the different steps and stages. And we talked about this earlier, but a reminder, I love this quote from Wasim Daha: delegate, don't abdicate. Whether you like it or not, as a manager or a leader, you're still responsible. You're still the one that's on the hook for completing that task and getting the outcome that you need. So an opportunity just to think about, from your perspective in your business, which tasks and situations should you be delegating? What is it that this process could be used for within your business, so that actually you're able to apply this as quickly as possible? Because of course, once you've learned these principles and tools, the most effective way to kind of start to get familiar with them is to really go into your business and start using this straight away. So love to kind of hear your key actions or takeaways from this session. You can either drop them in the chat, or you can put them or you can come off mute if you'd like to have a conversation, but start to think about for you, what are your key actions from this session? Certainly, while you're doing that, thinking about that, one of the things that I am thinking as a result of today is just to go through, actually, almost, I've recommended this to clients before, almost like a task audit. What are the things you're doing on an average week that potentially you shouldn't be doing? The things that you find yourself almost doing by default, because as high performers turned managers in businesses, we tend to be almost, we're so effective at just operating and getting on with stuff that we sometimes find ourselves doing things that we shouldn't be doing without realizing we shouldn't be doing them. And hopefully today's a bit of a reminder to you to start to think more clearly about what is it you're doing that perhaps you shouldn't be doing. And then start to think, okay, if I was going to delegate those tasks, who are the right people in my business? Who has got the right, level of competency, and for whom this is a strength, who potentially would see it also as a development area or a development program or project that I could then start to delegate to. That can be really useful to start to sharpen your thinking around how you apply this real time in your business. Okay. Any feedback on what your key actions are? Anything that you want to just drop in the chat? Because the other thing about doing kind of committing to your actions or saying it is that it kind of gives you a bit of accountability to change. So I'm just going to put in there review. This is my review. My weekly tasks and assess opportunities for delegation. Because we all have things that we hold on to that perhaps we shouldn't be holding on to. So that's my commitment. There you go. Review my weekly tasks, look back at the last week or two, assess the opportunities and see what I'm doing, and then assess opportunities for delegation, and then follow the process to do that. Okay, let me give you a couple other things, and then we'll wrap up today's call. So I love the thought of kind of creating successful leaders. It's a big part of what we do in our business. And one of the things that occurred to me a while back was that in order to create success in leadership, we need 5 things in place. We need the opportunity to have confidential conversations with people that we can trust, that we know are able to listen and potentially, give us the sounding board that we need to talk about difficult things that go on in your business, because leadership roles in a business are the most difficult role in any business. Second thing we need is a community. We need a community of people like us that are facing challenges like us, that we can, not only share ideas with, but also hear some of their challenges, because that community helps us and that feedback makes us realize we're not alone. Other people are going through what we're going through. The third thing we need is collaboration. We need to be able to share ideas and hear other ideas from people and start to collaborate on stuff, so that as we're trying out new approaches, new principles, new ideas, we've got other people that are doing the same, and we can kind of start to share what's working, share what's not working, share the challenges, and kind of calibrate as we go forward. And then the final couple of things we need challenge. We need people to challenge our ideas, challenge our thinking, and challenge us in general, so that we start to feel as if we are stretching and growing and improving ourselves, and that it's challenge that makes that growth happen. And then the final thing we need is commitment, and we need people that we can make a commitment to, and people that will hold us to our commitments. And that's really important, because we're in a role where you're really busy and there's lots going on. To make changes and make time for those changes takes real commitment. And without that commitment, we just carry on business as usual. And that's not what drives growth or higher performing organizations. So those 5 things are really, really useful. We have, so in our Coaching Leaders program, we create a program where that happens. And our next cohort, we're building our next cohort. We've got 8 out of the 10 places. We have a couple of places left. That will start end of September, early October. And if you are interested in that program, or you'd like to have a conversation about whether or not you would be a right fit for it, then feel free to, you can book a strategy session with me. I'll just give you this link. Let me just put that in the chat. If you'd like to schedule a short one-to-one, you've got a 45-minute discovery session. And in that session, you can talk about, perhaps what's going on in your business, perhaps some of the ideas that you have, and if there's things that you'd like to talk about that are more broad around leadership and how they fit within the program, very happy to discuss that with you. So there's the link to that. Takes you straight to my calendar. You can book a 45-minute discovery session, and really anything that's relevant for you or is a priority for you, you can put that on the agenda and we can discuss that. And in particular, if it links to leadership development and what you're doing and how you think I might be able to help, then feel free to schedule something in. Okay, final slide is just questions. We've covered, we've really kind of dived deep into delegation today. So I'll just, if there's any final questions that you have about either this topic or anything more broad in leadership, feel free to either come off mute and ask a question or drop it into the chat, and I'll happily answer it if there's something that's kind of particularly on your mind or that you'd like to cover today. We've got a bit of time. If you have a question, feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to answer it. So, any questions? Any questions before we close and wrap up? Let me know. Anything you want. Either put it in the chat or come off mute. I'll just give you a moment in case you are typing something. If not, we will wrap up today's session and close. So I'll just give you a moment just to check there's nothing else from you. I will send, as a follow-on from today, I will send a set of the slides on email. I'll send a link to this recording so that if you want to go back over anything, you've got it as a resource. I'll send the delegation tool as well, the tool that I talked through. And then if you want to share it with anyone else in your business or you want to sense check it, feel free to do that. And if you'd like to book a discovery session, of course, feel free to book something in my diary as well. Okay, I'm going to take silence as consensus to close. So have a wonderful Friday afternoon wherever you are. Have a lovely weekend ahead, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next call at some point. We run one of these every month. So if you'd like one, if you'd like to join us every month, feel free to jump in. And we've got a leadership workshop and a sales workshop every month. You are very welcome to join us. So I wish you a wonderful weekend, and I will catch up with you hopefully on the next session. Take care. Have a great weekend. See you soon.